Okay, so thank you for being here. Just by quick way of introduction, before I was an attorney, I was actually an engineer, still am an engineer. 2 degrees in civil engineering from Iowa State, Knight Law degree, still a licensed engineer in Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, admitted to practice in number of different courts. ACI National Board, Vice President, President, Chair of 132. Actually, didn't start 132. 132 started as a responsibility committee, which was a board committee. And then we had the audacity to actually publish a document, which the board didn't think we could do, so we became a TAC committee, and I converted that over then. That's when we became 132. Minnesota Concrete Council, and yes, I was your COVID president, which means I didn't go anywhere. Now remember this part about the views of the speakers are not the views of ACI staff and everything? That's because of this next slide. So they asked me to send in a picture that I could put up on Concrete International, and this is what I gave them. They wouldn't let me put that on the cover. I don't know why. So about 10 years ago, I was asked by the concrete contractors to speak at their convention, and I said, well, give me some ideas. What would you like me to talk about? Because I want to talk about what you're interested in, not necessarily what I'm interested in. And one of the topics was, when is cracking normal versus a defect? And I thought, wow, that's kind of the holy grail. I don't think anybody's ever written anything about that. So I started this search for the holy grail of when is it normal versus a defect. And everything I'll tell you is in this book. And it's at the ACI bookstore. It's chapter 4. And if you get the book appendix, one of the appendices is the 132 responsibility document. So you get that as a freebie. I like to say there's 3 kinds of learning: reading, observing, and licking the metal pole. My grandfather said something different about an electric fence, but I can't say that and good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment, another favorite saying. So some of you might feel like this with cracking, but we're going to talk through this and figure out what tools you have to work with when you get into trouble. We're not going to do this, because that's not going to make cracking go away, and I love to show my clients this one, because this is where I get paid and you don't. So I started my search, and I searched for articles and documents. I searched for crack and cracking all through all the ACI documents and found hundreds of references. And some interesting quotes. This one, what concrete 10 or more years old is free of cracks or micro cracks? I have not seen any in 65 years of concrete work in any kind of structure. Cracking seems to be a universal characteristic of concrete. Books and hundreds of papers have been written on the subject of cracking in concrete. And then he goes on to say, large sums of money have been spent in an effort to find a cure, but concrete seems to go in its own way, crack anyway. I'm not sure that researchers will not stop looking for a cure. I wish them all the luck. They need it, and the industry needs it also. Does anyone want to guess whose quote that was? It was Ed Abdenor, who was around a long time ago. Remember Calvin, Ed? By the way, Calvin wins the award, the popularity contest. You had the most people in the room this morning at the start of this session, so you win. And then my other favorite is Bryant Mather. Concrete is synthetic sedimentary rock. When God figures out how to make rock that won't crack, we'll figure out how to make concrete that won't crack, right? And then I did come across an article that said we can produce crack-free concrete. Why the hell would any of you write that article? Just put a gun to your head, Come on. So then you start looking around and you notice things like, okay, we cut these control joints in. These are cracks you pay for. Owners, I tell them it cracked, and I said, you got a free control joint. They never think that's funny, but they get it. So then you start wandering around. This was a job where I was actually on the owners committee. It was a Boy Scout building that we converted. It was an old drill hall at Fort Snelling. We converted to a Boy Scout urban adventure center. And around the center were the slabs, and there was an old slab next to a new slab. And they said, do you want us to run the control joints through the old slab? And I said, well, isn't the old slab cracked about every 10 or 12 feet? They said, yes, it is. Well, here's an example. There's the crack that you paid for, and there's the crack you got for free. And then you start noticing, you go to your kid's football game, and you see the cracks running around and everything. And this is actually a project in Florida I was retained on. This owner wanted to tear down this house because of the cracks in the slab in Florida. And of course, mapped them all out. Some of them were kind of bad. Actually, that's the Florida job. This is, that's still the Florida job. I'm sitting in the bench at LAX, of course, and what do I notice? Everybody else notices the buses pulling up. I'm noticing the cracks. That's Los Angeles International Airport. Everybody can still get on the bus, but it's cracked. Now, some places, cracks are more severe and they don't seem to care. This is Key West. Here's one of my favorites. I'm at an ACI convention. Does anybody work with Roland Constructors? Or know them? It says Roland Constructor is a matter of excellence, and where's the crack? Right through the sign. And this is New Orleans. New Orleans in front of the fire department. More New Orleans. They don't seem to care about cracks in New Orleans. It seems to work out okay. All right, so what industry guidance do we have? I am going to talk about legal cases in a minute, but I searched through and I said, okay, what guidance do we have in other documents and ACI documents to work with cracking? Well, there's a really good one in 360, Guide to Design of Slabs on Ground. Even with the best slabs and proper construction, it's unrealistic to expect crack-free and curl-free floors. Every owner should be advised by the designer and contractor that it is normal to expect some cracking and curing on every project. Stop. What does that say? Every owner should be advised by the designer and contractor that it is normal to expect some cracking and curling on every project. How many of you do that? Does anybody do that? Does anybody know that it said that? It's amazing. You search long enough in ACI documents, you can find anything you want. But part of what I'm going to leave you with is, and I'll get to it in a minute, is owner expectations and disclaimers, whatever you want to call them. But I think you should be telling your clients that you're going to get some cracks. Now, it says this does not necessarily reflect adversely on the adequacy of the floor's design or quality of construction. And then we go to 224.1R07, causes, evaluation, repair of cracks. Cracks in concrete have many causes. They may affect appearance only, or they may indicate significant structural distress or lack of durability. Cracks may represent the total extent of the damage, or they may point to problems of a greater magnitude. Their significance depends on the type of crack and the type of structure. For example, cracks that are acceptable in buildings may not be acceptable in water-retaining structures. I had a big litigation lawsuit on an aquarium tank. Cracks in an aquarium tank are a problem. People don't like to get sprayed when they're looking at the aquarium. So that's an issue. Here's the closest I came to what I'm calling the Holy Grail. Cracks need to be repaired if they reduce the strength, stiffness, or durability of the structure to an unacceptable level, or if the function of the structure is seriously impaired. That's the closest I've found to this line between normal and defect. Here's 302.1R, Guide for Concrete Floor and Slab Construction. Some curling, cracking can be expected on every project. Contractors are not necessarily responsible for all cracks. Many floor slab design features and concrete mix proportions are responsible for or contribute to cracking of concrete construction. So there's a lot out there. Here's an interesting one. Cracks are objectionable where their size or spacing compromise the strength, stability, serviceability, function, or appearance of the structure. Can anybody tell? There's a question back there?
Just real quick, that slide you said was posted to the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
Where was that from? There was no reference.
It's 224.1R07. Yeah. Now, this is what's interesting. The only reference I found to appearance, and can you tell me what document this is? Somebody shout it out. Mass concrete. Why are we worried about appearance with mass concrete? And why is this the only place that appearance shows up? I don't know, but there it is. The rest of it, we don't call out appearance. The ACI documents don't talk about appearance. Okay, so cracking is expected and in fact required to engage steel reinforcing. You've heard a number of times today that it's good in compression, bad in tension, but then it cracks, engages the steel, but it has to crack to engage the steel. Of course, beams, columns, slabs, and walls, of course, is where you're going to get that. Now, there's a table in 224R01 that talks about guide to reasonable crack widths. In other words, this gets cited by a lot of engineers about the crack width that you should expect. And of course, you got these little crack gauges. CTL has the crack gauges over in the conference center if you want to go get one. But they talk about what's an acceptable crack width. But then I say, but read the footnote. Read the footnote. It says it should be expected that a portion of the cracks in the structure will exceed these values. With time, a significant portion can exceed these values. These are general guidelines for design to be used in conjunction with sound engineering judgment. Imagine that. Let's apply a little sound engineering judgment. All right, other industry guidance. How many of you are aware of the ASCC position statements? Very valuable resources. Really valuable. Specifications for crack repair, cracks in slabs on ground, and cracks in structural concrete. I'm just going to flash them up here quickly. I won't read them and go through them, but these are really good resources. There are some other comments in here about discussing crack expectations with your client. Again, another reference like I talked about before. Comment made in cracks and slabs on ground. I love this one. The decision to repair, however, should be made with the knowledge that crack repair products and methods don't hide the cracks and may accentuate them. That's what Calvin was talking about at the start of this session. You repair the crack, you're just going to make it more obvious. If aesthetics are the only concern, a use-as-is decision may be best. I've had a case like this right now on a public facility where they're all hyperactive about some hairline cracks, and we're suggesting spray it with a sealer. Seal it up with a sealer, and you'll be fine. You're saying no. Why no? It accentuates it also. All right. Well, I'll tell my expert that when I get a hold of him, when I get back. Anyway, removing and replacing crack panels to a floor is often an economic waste that's counter to sustainability, not likely to solve the problem, and it probably won't match the color. So sometimes the repair can look worse than the crack. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. Here's our multiple choice exam. Is the crack normal? Is the crack a defect? Do we have unrealistic client expectations? Or do we really have a psychological problem? And I'm going to call that psychological problem hyperfocus, because this is what you get when you get cracking. I'll bet I get a call a month from somebody who says my driveway's cracked or my sidewalk's cracked, and I don't represent any homeowners. I send them somewhere else. Concentrating on something so hard you lose track of everything else. That's what happens when owners get cracks and they start focusing on them. It's a psychological problem. How can we address that? By actually advising them up front that it does crack, and then putting in some disclaimers in the contract documents, and I'll talk about those in a minute. So managing owner expectations, that's what we're really talking about. Otherwise known as unrealistic client expectations. Now, we're not talking about the truly bad conditions that could weaken the structure or really affect long-term durability. We're talking about the normal run-of-the-mill cracks that are going to happen, and you just need to be aware of. So these are actual disclaimers that I found going through documents, looking at what can we put in, what do other people use. Here's one that says some minor amount of cracking is to be expected. In fact, it's required to crack in order to engage reinforcing steel. We're not responsible for minor cracking that does not affect the strength or serviceability of the structure of which the concrete is a part. Good disclaimer, good example. Here's another one. Minor cracking is expected on any concrete slab. Whoever it is, not responsible for minor cracking that occurs in concrete slabs or that are due to subgrade preparation or settlement. Here's another example. We won't be responsible, and this is an interesting one because here they're saying we won't be responsible that cracks that don't result in crack wicks of a certain size. So this contractor is willing to say, I will basically guarantee to you we won't get cracks that will exceed a certain size. Okay, here's a concrete supplier. The warranty stated above are sole and exclusive. If you're selling a product, this is more to the concrete suppliers. You want to make sure that you exclude certain warranties that are included by law, which are typically merchantability and fitness for the intended purpose. So that's what this particular limitation is all about. And it does not cover cracking of any kind caused by but not limited to improper joint installation, improper placement, improper finishing, improper curing, structural overloading, and improper subbase and or base preparation. Pretty good list. Surface or other distress caused by improper placement, finishing, or curing, and any defects caused by the addition of water exceeding the water-cement ratio specified above, and or water added to the surface of the concrete during placing or finishing. This is obviously a client who had been terrorized by cracks, right? Because these are all the possible problems you can have if you're not the concrete supplier. Here's another one, another client that uses this one. They won't guarantee crack-free concrete between October 1 and some date in the spring, which for us in Minnesota is later than for most everybody else. And any concrete specified by the others that does not meet the mixed proportions listed above. Damage caused by others, including but not limited to snow plows and other equipment. And you can tell this is someone in Minnesota. Now, often these disclaimers are strictly construed against the contractor, especially if it's a homeowner. But, you know, let me back up a minute. So let's talk about an example out in Colorado. This particular case, and I did sweep through to try to find cases, legal cases involved with concrete cracks and cracking. There aren't that many, but there are some out there, believe it or not. This particular one was in Colorado, and it involved expansive clay. The basement heaved and cracked. The seller agreed to provide a standard 1-year warranty except for cracking of concrete flatwork. Now, the problem here is the issue that the warranties may be limited by express provision in the contract. However, the limitation must be accomplished by clear and unambiguous language, and the limitations will be construed strictly against the builder vendor of the house. That's typically what a court is going to do anytime a homeowner or a small owner is involved. And this court said, and get this, this was a real stretch to find in favor of the homeowner. Since the defects were due to vertical displacement and heaving, not cracking, the disclaimer did not apply. Now, that's a real stretch. That's a court trying to find in favor of a homeowner. How about some other case law? This was actually South Africa. Here's my favorite construction slide. Nobody ever starts a war or a lawsuit intending to lose, right? Everybody intends to win. What's the gap here in the middle? Well, the gap for me are the facts and the law. When you put it all together. And you all are responsible for the facts. I can look at the law. I can change the law, but it costs you a lot of money to try to do that with an appeal. And I can't guarantee it'll happen. So that's the gap there. So here's a Delaware case, 2010, custom home built for a guy named Malone. And of course there's cracks in the patios when the project's done. Owner alleges breach of contract. A guy named Millman was the concrete contractor and testified on behalf of this Doherty Custom Homes or whatever it was. And testified in court that this type of cracking is not a defect in the work, but rather the cracking is simply movement constant in the nature of concrete. And lo and behold, the court says that that's credible testimony. Cracking that is attributable to the expansion and contraction of concrete is an anticipated outcome of using concrete and does not constitute a defect in workmanship. I would expect all of you now to stand and applaud. I found it. I found a case, right? All right, but, of course, there's other cases that don't come out quite so well. Here's a case involving a post office, 1993, out in Canoga Park, California. Big slab, reinforcing bars, numerous problems, 10-day trial, 119-page opinion, which is not unusual for the business I work in, to have trials that my record is a 8-week jury trial and 213 days in arbitration on a case. So these cases can take on a life of their own. So this one, actually 10 days and 119 pages is not too bad. But can you imagine sitting on a jury for 2 weeks solid, listening to a construction case? You know, you could almost go mad. All right, so this court looked at this and said, well, the experts who've testified here, what did they say? They agree that concrete shrinks when it cures and that hairline cracks in concrete slabs are normal occurrences. So far, so good. However, they said it's credible evidence here that the cracks in this slab were far more than usual hairline cracks. It was uncontroverted that 4 of the cracks ran the entire length of the slab, and I think I said it was 22,000 square feet. Cracks were so wide that sand under the slab was visible. Coin could fall to the bottom through the crack. 70 to 80% of the rebar lay exposed on the sand beneath the slab. Yeah, where does rebar end up in a slab if it's not on chairs? I had a case once where we thought we were going to win because they didn't put the rebar on the chairs, and I was representing the engineer who was out looking at the slab and taking really good photos of everything, except that the photos included the workmen standing on the rebar raking the concrete without on chairs, and so we had photos of it in our own file, which didn't work out so well because our guy was standing right there, obviously, and didn't catch it. But anyway, so rebar's on the bottom of the slab, not installed according to the contract. Some people tell me that standard of care applies only to architects and engineers. I've had that debate with people. That's not true. Standard of care applies to any case involving negligence. If you drive your car from here, there's a standard of care that applies that includes, of course it's the law, but includes driving safely, driving carefully, observing the speed limit, stopping the stop signs. So there is a standard of care that applies to contractors. And it came out of this case on Doherty v. Malone. If you hold yourself out as a competent contractor to perform labor, the law presumes you possess the skill to perform it, and that the work should be done in a skillful and workmanlike manner. That's basically the standard of care for a contractor, regardless of what the contract says. A couple cases on substantial performance. That's doing something. It's not doing exactly what the contract says, but it's doing something good enough for the purpose intended. And that's basically what was the finding in this particular case. So in this Doherty v. Malone case, they also went on to talk about the work being done and with not in exact requirements of the contract, but if a reasonable person were satisfied by it, the builder's entitled to recover despite the owner's dissatisfaction. That was another point made in that case, which I thought was interesting. That really isn't the standard, but that's the standard that this particular case applied. Now, government contracts can require strict compliance with contract documents, but you've still got the options of substantial performance as a defense and economic waste, meaning tearing out and repairing something for minor cracks could be economic waste as opposed to the cost to repair. Here's a cracking case in a concrete driveway. Supposed to be 4.5-inch slab. The slab thickness varied pretty badly, average of 4 inches. The court found substantial compliance, but awarded the owner the ratio of the concrete they didn't get, basically, which I thought was kind of creative. And here's where they said, or they talked about the range of the defects and the average. Here was the finding I thought was interesting. Despite these problems, the evidence supports the magistrate's conclusion that they had substantially performed under the contract and the driveway had not failed in its essential purpose. In other words, you could still drive and park on it. Right? Still worked as a driveway. Generally, in a construction case, damages is the cost of repair, unless cost of repair would constitute economic waste. So I won't get too much further into that. But here's a classic, in this particular case, classic homeowner testimony about cracks in concrete. Asked on cross-examination, could you live with the concrete the way it is? And the owner says, if it was do or die, I guess I could. But you know, it's a new house, and it just ruins the look of the whole place as you drive up the driveway, and the first thing you see is the driveway all cracking up. So you know it's not very satisfactory. And that's the psychological problem. That's what I talk about in psychology. I won't get too much further into this. One of my favorite cases, this goes back to the old 1/8 inch and 10-foot flatness requirement before the F numbers, and we realized we didn't really know how to measure that, and we realized we're specifying it and nobody was building to it. So it was a Navy rack storage facility, 1/8 inch and 10-foot specified, and they also specified the means and methods of placement, and basically the court said, look, without deviating from the spec, you can't reach 1/8 inch and 10 foot and build it the way that was specified. So it's impossible to perform. All right, so conclusions. According to the blueprints, this was supposed to be a duct. It's one of my favorite slides. The point is, we've had construction defects, cracking in concrete for ages. It's amazing that this stuff is still there. So concrete cracks. Don't feel guilty when it cracks. It's not always your fault. Rule number 1. Number 2, try to avoid cracking by good placement, finish, and curing techniques. Review the job requirements, documentation of those issues. Educate your clients. Like I said, how many of you actually talk to your clients and say, there'll be some cracking here, here's the parameters. Use the ASCC position statements if you can. Don't assume cracks are a defect. Remember 2241R7 need to be repaired if they reduce the strength, stiffness, or durability of the structure to an unacceptable level. That, to me, that's the defining point between normal and defect based on what I could find. Position statement number 5, use a repair allowance in some of these jobs. Remember the legal defenses: substantial performance, measure of damages, impossibility of performance. And then for contractors, this is something for engineers to be aware of. If a contractor can show that they've strictly complied with the contract documents, let me repeat that. They can show that they have strictly complied with the contract documents and it doesn't work, then the burden shifts the responsibility to the engineer from the contractor. If the contractor cannot show that they've strictly complied with the contract documents, that burden of risk stays with the contractor. The best possible outcome for a contractor is to get paid for the repair work. I don't know how many of you remember this slide. Original contract is the dinghy and the change order is the boat, right? So Calvin was looking over here. I know that, but no, yeah. And finally, the only time I ever got in trouble with this slide was when I put it up in London, in front of some London underwriters. And I realized I'd made a mistake. They took it good. But it's all about people. It's all about people working through these issues and resolving them. Okay?